GM, welcome back to another episode on the Web3 Academy podcast, which aims to guide entrepreneurs, businesses, and creators into the world of Web3. We're teaching you how to actually use this stuff rather than how to speculate on this stuff. And today we have a great episode called The Truth About NFT Royalties and How Creators Can Maximize NFT Revenue. I am Kyle Reidhead. I'm super excited to have you listening to this episode. This is an article that I wrote on this topic. NFT royalties have become a very popular conversation at the moment, and a lot of people aren't sure what's going on here. So this is going to break it all down for you and then give you some tips to ensure that you're still earning revenue, royalties, or otherwise. Before I get into the episode though, I need a favor. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever it is, please follow us or subscribe to our Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. These follows, these subscriptions, this is what allows us to rank higher in the podcast world, in the YouTube world, and get us up higher on the rankings for this category. We want to make sure that this podcast gets in front of as many people as possible. And it's a small step for you. All you got to do is just stop what you're doing, open up your phone, your desktop, whatever. Just go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, click follow, and that's it. It's a small step for you. It's a big thing for us. Super grateful for you. Thank you so much for doing that right now. And now, since you've done that, let's get into the episode and teach you about NFT royalties. So royalties on NFTs, one of the great unlocks of Web3, right? Not so fast. Turns out Web3 doesn't really have a solution for royalties after all. I mean, royalties are definitely possible in NFTs, don't get me wrong. It just might not be what many of us thought. So by the way, in case you're unaware, NFT royalties are a means by which a percent of the value of an NFT transaction is given back to the original creator of the NFT. Typically, this is in the range of 2.5 to something like 10% of a transaction, just depending on what the creator sets. Now, what's been gaining a lot of attention lately, and why this has become such a hot topic, is thanks to the new NFT marketplace, SudoSwap. Okay, and it's that the royalties on NFTs can be circumvented. In fact, SudoSwap has decided to do just that for all NFTs sold on their platform. But how is this possible, you might be asking? Isn't it written in the code? Isn't Web3 all about immutability and permissionless exchanges? Shouldn't this just work? Well, yes, Web3 is all about those things. However, there are limitations to what it can and cannot enable. And it turns out that royalties and NFTs might be one of those things. Now, don't worry, my fellow listeners, it's not all bad news. In this podcast, I'm going to explain why receiving NFT royalties is not a guarantee, it's still possible, and what you can do to ensure that you make the most from your NFTs. So let's just answer the question. Are royalties on NFTs enforceable at the smart contract level? The simple answer here is no, they are not enforceable. I actually asked this question on Twitter to find out why, and I actually received some great responses from some of the big brains in this space. If you're not following me on Twitter, it's Kyle Reidhead. Just go to KYLEREIDHEAD. It's also in the show notes, and give me a follow. But Julian Genesto, who's the founder of Unlock Protocol, he answered my question on Twitter. And he says that you can't do this. You can't enforce royalties and NFTs, even with contracts, because the transfer function, which is used to transfer the ownership of the NFT, has zero knowledge of the payment or the currency or anything else. Okay, so it actually can't control that. Now, you could do it in sort of a, you'd have to basically break it or disable the contract in order to do it, but it would make it much harder to actually use the NFT. So it wouldn't really work across most NFT marketplaces and things like that. So it's not an ideal situation. David Mihal also responded. He's the founder of Crypto Fees, .info and Crypto Stats. Well, he also chimed in and he explained that the smart contract of an NFT can't enforce conditions against third parties, such as marketplaces. All it can do is provide some extra metadata to suggest conditions, such as royalties, but ultimately the marketplace has to implement them. So just like you can have metadata of like your descriptions of what the NFT are, what the details are, the rarities, the traits, all those things, those are just pieces of data that the marketplace itself can decide to show or implement, but it doesn't have to. Well, the same is true with NFT royalties. Okay, so the TLDR is this. It's not possible to hard code royalties into an NFT, which must be implemented by everyone who interacts with it. And that's marketplaces or user wallets. So what's possible today is that you can code in some data, and should the marketplace decide to implement that data, then it works without any problems. However, the problem is we have to trust that they will, right? And we don't want to trust marketplaces, okay? These are centralized, in most cases, centralized companies, right? And so we don't want to have to trust them to honor the royalties of creators. Trusting third parties is one of the main reasons we are rebuilding the internet in the first place. So unfortunately, we know where this ends up. Now, thankfully, this far into Web3's sort of early life, the large NFT marketplaces have decided to honor and pass along the royalties to creators. However, a new marketplace in town called SudoSwap has decided to exclude them completely. And in an industry which is full of speculators and traders, the extra profit earned by saving on royalties has attracted many to move from marketplaces like OpenSea over to the low fee and royalty-free marketplace SudoSwap. So SudoSwap doesn't just circumvent NFT royalties, it's also very, very low fees. I think it's 0.5% for a transaction, whereas on something like OpenSea and the others, it's around like 2.5%. So for those who just want to make a buck, I mean, why wouldn't they go over there, right? Competition like this is almost always results in a race to the bottom. What I mean by that is fees go to zero. Zeneca, who we actually had on the podcast, I think last week, from when you're listening to this, amazing podcast, by the way, on NFTs. We do touch on this a little bit. We go into a bunch of other conversations around NFTs and business models. But Zeneca said, growing increasingly more convinced zero creator royalties is inevitable. Sadly, projects and creators should be proactively thinking about alternative revenue models. We certainly are at Zen Academy. Culturally, we must fight for artist royalties, at least in my opinion. 10K projects are different. I will get into some of these other alternatives in just a second. But let's look at potential options for the future of NFT royalties. It's not all bad news. We might be able to find a way to make this work. So there are a few options out there. Number one, devs can do something, right? Build an on-chain royalty standard. So as I mentioned above, the ability to implement NFT royalties on chain does not currently exist, but that doesn't mean it can never exist. To be clear, most developers in the space are saying it's simply not possible. So maybe I'm being, overly optimistic here, but there is one industry that is known for solving massive problems and innovating quickly. It's Web3, right? So there have been a few proposals in the Ethereum community to start working on creating an on-chain standard for NFT royalties already, including EIP 4910 and EIP 2891, but to be determined on how this will play out. The second thing we can do is create an NFT royalty standard in the community or at the cultural layer, okay? So never underestimate the power of community, especially in Web3. Sometimes we need to rely on the social layer to set standards and incentives. There is a possibility that if we can't figure out how to build this on-chain, the community itself can enforce these standards across the industry. NFT marketplaces are an open and free market and can choose to change or do whatever they want. However, let's remember they are a business and in an industry built on top of interoperable technology. So unlike users on Facebook, where we essentially are stuck with our profiles, followers, and content on that platform, users on NFT marketplaces can simply move to any marketplace seamlessly with a quick click of a button. Our assets, our NFTs, everything goes with us. So should the community decide NFT royalties are important, we can simply vote and enforce rules by choosing where we buy and sell our NFTs. So Jeff Kaufman, founder of Jump, went as far as to say that honoring NFT royalties would be a form of marketing for the NFT marketplaces. So Jeff says, for NFT royalties, don't underestimate that when marketplaces honor royalties, they're unlocking free marketing. The creator or brand wants to drive traffic to the marketplace. The marketplace doesn't pay the creator for this marketing, the seller does. Well, I tend to agree with the statement in the short term. I believe as the industry grows and becomes more mainstream, these Web3 ethos won't hold up as strong. In my opinion, these ethos need to be written in code and become trustless for them to continue. Over time, humans and especially businesses tend to trend along the lines of being greedy and looking for the most profitable way of doing things. A final interesting thought that I came across on this is the idea of tipping in countries like the US. So tipping is not law there, however, it has become a cultural norm in a few countries around the world. Maybe we can accomplish something similar here. Not sure that I believe that that's the way it's going to go, but it's an interesting thought. The final point is to build a collector base that wants to pay royalties or create additional revenue streams. Beeple put a tweet out on this, and Beeple summed it up nicely here. He just said, I think the creator royalty argument is actually a lot simpler than people make it out to be. There is zero way to force royalties technologically. So creators will have to build a collector base that wants to honor these royalties. It's really that simple. So build a strong community and fan base like the best artists in the world have always done, and people will be willing to pay whatever you want for your art. Look, the big takeaway here is that NFTs are simply a tool for your business. It doesn't matter if that business is an exclusive community, art, a membership access, or something else. If you want to get paid for your work, you need to create great work which provides real value to collectors or customers, okay? In 2021, people simply thought that if they create an NFT, they would just make money, right? And to be honest, the market was so immature and euphoric that this was actually kind of true. The market is now maturing, and people are realizing that an NFT is not a magic way to make money. It's simply a tool to enable digital ownership, permissionless commerce, and programmability to a product or service. So let's talk about what creators can do to maximize their revenue when using NFTs. So how can we, as NFT creators, maximize revenue? Well, my recommendation is to not rely on royalties for your business. Like any business, it's important to diversify your revenue streams. Think about other business models or avenues to generate revenue via these NFTs. Royalties can be one revenue stream for NFT, and if paying royalties works out, then perfect. That's all gravy for you. But in case they don't, there are many other options for you. Here are a few examples we've seen so far in this industry. So one, withhold a percent of your collection supply for future profits. Taking a piece out of the playbook from NFT OG Larva Labs, creators of CryptoPunks, Meebits, Autoglyphs, etc. Larva Labs withheld 10% of the supply of CryptoPunks, so about 1,000 NFTs because they made 10,000 of them, and they launched their collection with zero royalties as sort of a feature for the collection. Over time, as CryptoPunks gained adoption and value, they sold off some of that supply, and then finally sold all of it when Yuga Labs acquired the IP rights to CryptoPunks. You can think of this similar to holding onto equity or shares in a company, right? As it grows in value, the founders tend to take profit in the form of selling equity in their company. So you can do kind of the same idea with NFTs, which to me is a great play, makes complete sense. You get rewarded if it works out, and that's how this should be anyway. The other way is intellectual property. So there's a lot of experimenting going on with IP for NFTs. So I'm not going to give an exact model of what you can use here, but instead I'll just share you some things to think about. So I just mentioned how Larva Labs sold the rights of CryptoPunks to Yuga Labs. So, I mean, there's a revenue stream in itself. They made quite a buttload of money from that sale. But also, if you created the typical 10K character or avatar or PFP or whatever to represent, let's say, a community, you could then build additional businesses or products around those NFTs, whether that be some merch, digital content like a show or a movie, or even a video game. This is what you're seeing with things like Moonbirds, where they're building a metaverse. Bored Ape Yacht Club is doing this as well. So there are many ways that you can monetize the brand or the IP of whatever it is you create. There's even potential that your NFT holders will do it for you. It just depends how you decide to incentivize the community. So basically what I'm saying is the NFT itself doesn't need to always be the means of ongoing revenue. Obviously, when someone buys the NFT off of you when you first mint, you make some money, but you don't need reoccurring money from those NFTs. You can build other things around those NFTs or around that IP, and that's how you can generate revenue. Or the next thing up is subscription-based NFTs. So this likely doesn't work well for, let's say, art NFTs, although maybe, but definitely community-based NFTs, SaaS products, and so on. You can create NFTs which expire at a certain time, whether it's 1 month, 1 year, etc., and they're burned unless the subscription payment is made. Or you could take it one step further, whereby only people who pay and hold your subscription NFT are able to buy and mint your other NFTs. It's almost like an exclusive access membership for your top fans. This would give you an ongoing revenue stream and likely ensure that those buying your art will honor the royalties as well. So there's a lot of potential here for many products using subscription-based NFTs. Now, look, if you want to get someone to, subscribe to you in order to mint your stuff, you're going to need to create good content. So if you want to be an artist or a creator, you got to create good art, right? If you want to create a cool product and use an NFT to sell it, you got to create a really good product. So this just doesn't come easy, but there are plenty of opportunities to generate revenue so long as you're creating good things. There's also something called a Harburger tax. These are similar to property tax. You pay a monthly or a yearly sort of fee to keep your token. If you don't pay it, you lose it. This type of payment can actually be programmed on-chain into the contract. Unlike royalties, as Herberger taxes are not related to peer-to-peer or marketplace transactions. So this is a different concept than most people are used to. So it's hard to say how well this would go over, but another option nonetheless. So basically they're sort of paying a subscription fee in order to have access to this token is kind of what this is. You can think of it more as a tax though. But these are just a few ways that you can create additional revenue streams from the NFTs that you create. So in conclusion, I fully support creators receiving royalties on their NFTs and feel optimistic that Web3 will find a solution to this problem. My hope, however, is that we can find a way to solve this problem on-chain rather than relying on trust, as history shows that trust rarely works out in the long run. That said, it's important to understand that royalties may never be enforced at the smart contract level, which means there's always a risk that creators won't be paid the royalties that you deserve. This is why it's so important to never rely on NFT royalties as the only revenue stream for your business. Instead, you should look to diversify and find additional means to generate revenue from your NFTs. The other important factor to recognize here is that if you can just build a strong community or collector base, you can always find a way to win one way or another. Like everything in Web3, community is the foundation upon which success is built. So my recommendation to all creators out there is to start by building a community around your mission or your vision or whatever it is that you're doing. Then you can be open and transparent with that community and use them to experiment with different forms of NFTs and payment options until you find something that works for you and works for your community. The NFT space is so early and we're still in the learning phases, so there's no perfect model yet. In the meantime, it definitely doesn't hurt to start creating, building, and experimenting on your own. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the next Larva Labs, paving the way for millions of NFT creators coming after you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. NFT creators, keep creating, keep building, keep doing really cool things, and keep experimenting. Like I said, this is all still new. We're still trying to figure out what is the best way to do things. So innovate, right? Innovate and iterate and just keep trying and see what works. I gave you a list of opportunities and options above, but maybe there's new things that you can try. And if you have those, feel free to tweet out at me or tweet out at Web3 Academy. Let me know what you're thinking of how we can continue to drive revenue with our NFTs. But otherwise, if you like this episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and or on YouTube. Shit, you know what? Just do all three. I know you've got them on your phone or your desktop. Just go to all three right now and just help us that way. That would be super, super awesome. Thank you, friends, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to Web3 Academy. We hope this helps you along your Web3 journey. And if it does, please share this episode and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. By the way, if you have yet to join the Discord community, you are missing out. This is where all the magic happens. This is where we learn, where we ask questions, where we network. You want to be in there. The link to join is in the description below. And finally, a quick disclaimer. Nothing in this podcast was financial advice. Crypto and Web3 can be risky. You can literally lose it all. In fact, if you invest on account of what we say, you probably will lose it all. So don't do that. In all honesty, the point of this podcast is to remove the noise of markets and price and focus on utility and implementation anyway. So you should not take any of this as financial advice. Thank you, friends, and see you in the next one.